My name is Delia Ruiz. I am an author and educator, and the face behind Aventuras en ESL, which is a platform where I share diverse book picks focusing primarily on the Latina, Latinx, Hispanic culture. And today I have the honor of hosting an amazing author, illustrator, Duncan Tonatiuh, author and illustrator of many incredible books, such as some of these. He has a very, very unique illustrator style that we're going to learn a little bit more about today. And I'm so excited to chat with him today, especially so he can tell us a little bit more about the upcoming fall 2022 release, A Land of Books. So join me as we explore more about Duncan's author journey, his illustrator life, and more about his books in depth. So let's welcome in it.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hi, Duncan. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you so much for joining me today. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in San Miguel de Allende, in
Ah,
Guanajuato.
in
I'm
Mexico.
from Mexico, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, again, happy Monday. Welcome, Duncan. I'm so glad that you get to join me today. And we really want to dive deep into your author journey, your illustration journey, and everything in between. And that kind of just gets us going with our first question of today, which is really about your upbringing. I know you mentioned right now you're in Mexico right now, and I've read before you also attended school in the US. So I want to know a little bit more about how did your upbringing influence your stories and your artwork?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a big influence, a huge influence. Yeah, so I was born in Mexico City. And then when I was about 8, my family moved to a smaller city in central Mexico called San Miguel de Allende. It's a very beautiful place. Maybe some of you have heard about it. Um, and then when I was about 15 years old, I moved to the US and I attended a high school in Massachusetts and later on college in New York City. And I'm a dual citizen. My father's American, he's Anglo white, but he came down to Mexico in the late 60s with his hippie buddies and never went back to the US. He's been here for more than 50 years now. And my mom, she passed away some years ago, but she was Mexican. And so I'm both. And when I moved to the US to attend high school, I didn't like my high school in San Miguel, and I was already interested in art. And my cousin had attended this high school that was very arts oriented, a cousin in the US, and he thought I would like it. And I really did. But as I spent more time in the US, I began to miss things that were around me growing up in Mexico, like, the food, the music, different traditions. And so I just became much more interested and much more, I guess, aware of things that I used to always have around me.
Mhm.
And just became more curious about the art of Mexico, about different issues that affect people of Mexican origin in both countries, in both the US and Mexico, because there's such a large, Mexican and Mexican American community in the US. So that was definitely a big, like in my different classes at my university, whenever I was able to, I would connect the assignments I had to my Mexican background. Like I remember I took this photography class at Parsons where I went to school. And so I decided that for my project, I was going to go photograph this big immigrant protest that was happening, where there was a lot of Mexican immigrants participating. Or I took a writing class, and I remember trying to write a short story that took place in San Miguel, trying to remember what it was like when I was a kid. So definitely my upbringing and kind of living in both countries, having family in both countries, was a huge influence into the kinds of books I make now.
I love that. And I love how you always go back to your culture and try to incorporate that in the things that you do. And especially within your art, we see a lot of that, especially in all of your books. So I kind of want to know, with your art life, have you always been interested in art? Have you always been a creative individual?
I mean, I became interested in art from a young age. When I was in when I moved to San Miguel, soon after I moved, my cousins came to visit me. My cousins from Mexico City, and they brought a stack of comic books like Spider-Man and X-Men, and I'd never seen comic books, and so I got really into them. I began, saving my allowance to buy my own comics, And then we would usually get together at my grandma's over, summer break, winter break, and we would share the ones we had, the comics we'd bought, but we'd try and make up our own comic books, our own stories, make up our own superheroes, draw our own villains. And I've been drawing ever since. It's something that I never stopped doing. And then, when I kept on doing it in high school and college, but in college, my last year, I had to have a senior project.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to make it about a friend I'd met at this worker center, a friend named Sergio, who is from Mexico, but he's Mixtec, which is an indigenous group from southern Mexico. And I thought his story was really interesting of how he had come from this small village in Guerrero in southern Mexico to this large city in the US. And he had worked for many years as a busboy in this restaurant. But he was paid very poorly. He had really bad working conditions, and other people at his job did too. And he decided to organize, even though he could get in trouble because he was undocumented. And so I decided to make my senior project about that. And one of the first things that I did was go to my university's library and look up Mixtec artwork. And in books, I found these kinds of drawings. These are drawings that the Mixtec people made hundreds of years ago. Because there's modern day Mixtecs, but they were also a civilization similar to the Aztecs, to the Maya. And they made books. They made these really long books that fold out like this, like accordions. And so I decided to try and, for my project, which I was hoping to do some kind of like a comic book, a graphic novel, a short graphic novel, to try and draw it in this style. And so that's why if you look at my books, all my characters, you always see them in profile, and the way I draw feet and ears, it's all inspired from these kinds of drawings that people made hundreds of years ago.
I love that because your illustration style is so unique. I could spot it a mile away. I think when I enter a bookstore and I see your artwork right away, I know it's you. I know it's your artwork right away. And you've illustrated, you have your own books as well, and you've illustrated a couple of others for many authors as well. And I kind of want to know a little bit more about, is there a particular book that kind of hits home? With all the books that you've done, is there a project that has a special place in your heart?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to just choose one, because I put a lot of effort to make a book. Takes me at least 6 months, usually closer to a year. So, it's a long process, and I put a lot of effort, a lot of thought and care into what I do, a lot of energy. So it's hard to choose one over the other. I think there's different things about each book that I'm especially kind of proud of. For example, my first book called Dear Primo is my favorite to read out loud. Or for example, this one, which is my latest book, A Land of Books. I'm really happy with the design, I incorporate all these different icons in it, all this iconography. There's this part here, which is kind of like a dream sequence. And I'm really proud of how the pages work with one another.
That's
Like here, the
beautiful.
brother and the sister are dreaming of the Amoshtin that people made hundreds of years ago. And so it's kind of this, here you see them both, and then it kind of zooms in into the sister, and then it zooms in even farther, to kind of like what's in her mind. And then we pan to the brother, and then we kind of pull out. So I was really trying to think, like, I'm proud of how the pages work with one another in this particular book. And yeah, and like I said, for every book, there's something that I'm proud of. In terms of writing, the one I'm probably most proud of is Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote, because it's a story similar to a fable, like if kids read it, it may remind them of the Little Red Riding Hood, of the
Yes.
Gingerbread Man. But it's also an allegory of the journey, of the dangers that migrants often go through to reach the US. So in the story, Pancho rides on top of a train with the help of this coyote and crosses the river, walks through the desert. And those are dangers that migrants often go through to reach the US. So you can read the story in two different ways. So I'm very proud in terms of the writing, for example, for this story.
I love, love, love that one because, like you said in that book, you use the animals, and with the story, we see La Bestia, the train, we see the whole journey, and we see the animals, sweating through the desert. There's so many scenes that we can talk a lot about in depth when it comes to social justice and things like that. So I would probably say that that's probably my favorite book. Oftentimes, as a book reviewer, when people ask me, what is your favorite book? And you say, oh, well, all of them, they have so many. But I can honestly say I've probably labeled your book as like, no, Duncan Tonatiuh's book, Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote is one that hits home, not only because I've had family who've crossed that border, but I think it also sparks the conversation that picture books are for everyone, not just kids, because I've used that book to start conversations with adults. And so that kind of goes back with, books are for everyone. And I love how you illustrated that book. I love how you told the journey with that story. So I love that book. I have it. I think I have it autographed back there somewhere. But it's such a beautiful book and it's such a special story. And with more and more books coming out from you, your 2022 book is coming up. Atlanta Books actually have it with me too. I took the little jacket off right now because underneath it, it's like a little special surprise too.
Yeah,
So I
okay.
want you to go a little bit more in depth with this one. I want you to tell us a little bit about the book. I know you've kind of showcased a little bit of the scenes inside, but tell us, how did the inspiration come about for this story?
Thank you. Yeah. So I was mentioning how I drew inspiration for my illustrations from these kinds of books that the Mixtecs, the Aztecs or Mexica made, the Maya. And I've been drawing in a style influenced by this style for more than 10 years now. But so it struck me that it'd be good to know more about it and learn more about it. And so I tried learning more about the people that made these kinds of books. Why did they make them? How did they make them? What were they about? And that's one wonderful thing about being an author and an illustrator is I can try and learn about a subject that really interests me and hopefully present it to people in an interesting way, try and make a good picture book out of it in my case. And so that's what this book is about. It's this girl telling her brother that their land is Anamochtlalpan, a land of books. And that's something that I didn't know as much, but I sort of learned is that there was this rich bookmaking tradition in Mesoamerica before the Spanish and other Europeans came. There were who knows how many, sadly, most of the books that were made in Mesoamerican times before the 1500s were destroyed. Um, um, when the Spanish came or later when priests tried to convert the indigenous people to Christianity, to Catholicism. And so we don't know how many books there were before that, but there were probably thousands of books and there were libraries and there was this like rich tradition, and the people that made books were really highly regarded in Mesoamerican society. And so I thought that was something important to share because I don't know that a lot of people realize that. I didn't really know that much about it. And so I wanted to learn more about it, and how the Tlacuiloque were the people that painted books. And so in the book, it sort of shows, how the books were made, the Mexica, they made the paper for the books from the bark of a tree, of the Amacahuitl tree, how they made the colors, from different plants, from minerals, even from insects, like the cochineal insect that lives on the nopal. How the Tlacuiloque, like I said, were very highly regarded, well regarded in Mexica society, and they had to attend a special school, the Calmecac, with the nobility, with the warriors, because they need to know about, about astronomy, about warfare, about religion, about all sorts of subjects, so they could paint those things in books. One thing that's very different about the books that the Mexica and others made is that they didn't have any letters in them. They only had drawings, but the drawings could be read, the different color that a person was wearing meant something, the position of hands meant something, the different symbols could represent years, could represent places. So these books, even though they don't have any letters in them, they could be read, but not everyone knew how to read these books. Only, the Tlatoanis, the governors, the priests. But there were another thing that I discovered that I thought was really neat and really interesting is that there would be book readings. Sometimes there would be festivals, and at these festivals, there would be a reader that would sing the words that were painted on books. And there would be musicians that would play music as the book is being read, and dancers that dance as the book is being read, incense that burn. It was sort of like a performance.
It's
Um,
amazing.
and so I thought that that was a really neat thing. And that's when the Masewali, the people that weren't part of the elite, when they would experience these books and see these books and hear the stories that these books told.
That is amazing. I feel like each time that I read one of your books, I kind of go into a history adventure in a sense. And it kind of goes back to the same thing that as an adult, I read picture books to learn more about my culture. My family's from Mexico, and I didn't get a lot of that attending school in the US. So I can go back to picture books and read stories like yours, and I'm in amazement and awe of like, oh, I did not know this. I'm learning about this for the first time. And of course, since it's a picture book, it's visual. That's my learning style too. But there's so many amazing things. I think you highlighted already one of my favorite pages, which is the area where, let me highlight this one again, where they are using the plants, using the insects for all the colors and everything. And I can already see this book being read aloud in classrooms and going deeper into those conversations. I remember making paper in art class out of, just shredded little pieces. And it's kind of like, let's go even further. Like, let's go and explore how did they use the tree bark and everything. So this is such an amazing book, and it comes out later this year. And I kind of want to know more about your research style. How long does it normally take you to research content for a book like this or any future projects?
I mean, it varies. I'll do at first I do some kind of very basic research, and I don't know, that'll take me a month or something, so that I have something that I can kind of share with my editor. I'll write a manuscript and I'll share with my editor, and it'll be pretty rough. And then sometimes he'll be like, I'm not sure about this. I get a lot of ideas, a lot of books kind of turned down. But if he's interested in it, um, and other people at the publishing company are interested in it, then that's when I'll kind of like dive a little deeper and try and just learn more about a subject. And that'll take, it'll take several months, and especially when that's when I begin revising the story. When I wrote this, the first version was very encyclopedic, and I was trying to like include everything. I read almost like an encyclopedia entry, and of like all the different groups that made books, and I was sort of talking about what happened after the conquest and when the books got burned. And so then I kind of had to narrow it down and also try and make it hopefully more appealing to young readers. And that's why I decided to, tell it in the first voice. And first it was the dad speaking, but then I decided that, so hopefully kids can relate even more. It should be like a young person, and so I thought that the sister talking to her brother would be a good narrator from it. And actually a lot of the things from my first draft made it to the author's note. That's where I kind of tried to explain some of those things that trying to cram it all in the actual picture book it just didn't read very well. But so yeah, so as I'm revising, I'll keep on kind of doing research and kind of try and find good sources to kind of see if I'm understanding everything correctly. I mean, I definitely, I'm not a anthropologist or like, so I try and do my best to hopefully present the best information, the most up-to-date information. But I definitely I'm learning as this is not something that I've known for years and years. It's something that I'm kind of learning and piecing together myself, and hopefully I'm able to do a good job understanding the subject and presenting it in an interesting way for young readers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you mentioned some important points already and how it takes time, you know. Oftentimes when children or students see, oh, I want to write a book someday, it goes through many drafts and it goes through revision and it's a whole process. And, as a teacher, I also appreciate that a lot of your books often contain additional information and websites to further research content like this. So I want to ask you, for students and children who are interested in possibly illustrating or writing their own books, what piece of advice would you offer them? Because, taking a book does take time and that's completely okay.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely that it takes time. I would say, I mean, a couple of things. I think for people that are interested in writing, my advice would be to read a lot. Because when you read, and especially try to read like a writer, try and read like an author, like pay attention to what techniques are other authors using, like sometimes a book is written in the third person, from a narrator, from a voice, so to speak, that tells us, but sometimes it's a character in the story that's kind of telling the story. Sometimes stories are very linear, but sometimes stories are told, maybe they start at the middle and then you go back to explain how you got there and then you finish the story. So if you read, you can pay attention to all those different tools and techniques that other authors use and then try and apply them to your own writing, to your own stories. And for drawing, for people that are interested in being visual artists, I would say that there's not one correct way to draw. There's different styles, there's different tools and materials. Some people are very good at drawing with a pencil and making their drawings look very realistic. But you can use scissors and glue to make a collage. You can use a computer, you can use a camera, you can use crayons. There's all sorts of different materials and all sorts of different styles. There's great artists that draw very realistic, but then there's artists that do something much more abstract or more cartoony. So I would invite people to young artists to experiment with different materials and to try and expose themselves to different kinds of art to see what they like from different places and try that out in their own artwork.
I love that piece of advice. Definitely could be applied to anyone who's in the author journey and in the illustrating phase. But with your own personal journey, did it take a long time to get an agent and jump into the role of becoming an author illustrator, or was it more streamlined and easy for you? How did that go about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky. I wanted to be an artist since I was a teenager, but I always thought that I was going to do things for adults. I thought maybe I'll write a novel or I'll, do paintings that hang in galleries. I didn't really consider doing books for young readers till I had almost graduated from college. And what happened is that this is actually my senior project called Journey of a Mixteco. Mixteco when I was in college, my senior year, and it folds out like an accordion. Um,
Oh,
and there's
similar to this.
yeah,
Yes.
and so here's my friend, and eventually it became, and years later I was actually able to publish it with the title Undocumented. But this is actually what I did when I was in college. And it folds out like an accordion, and that's when I first came up with my illustration style. And a professor at my university thought that it was very interesting. She thought that it was good, and she had illustrated some children's books and was friends with an editor at a publishing company. And she said, would you mind if I show this to this editor I know? I think he would be interested in your work. And I said, oh, please, take this printout, take that printout. And so she showed it to this editor, and he thought it was interesting. And I met with him at his office, which happened to be about 8 blocks from where I went to school. And so I met with him, and he said, this book you're doing is kind of weird, the way it folds, and it's more for older readers. But if we receive a manuscript that we think suits your style, we'll get in touch. We'd love it if you illustrate a book for us. And I said, that'd be wonderful, but I like writing too. Maybe I could write the story. And so then he said some very basic things to me about picture books. He was like, they're usually 32 or 40 pages long because that's a very
Right.
efficient way to fold the paper. He says you want to leave a title page, kind of like a cover inside of the book. You want to have a copyright page with more information of where the book is published. And he said, if you write a book, a manuscript, I would suggest you make the protagonist, your main character, maybe a young person or an animal, someone that young readers can identify with. And, here's my email, here's my phone number. And so sometime later, I had an idea for a book about two cousins, which became Dear Primo, a letter to my cousin. And I've been working with the same editor for what is it, almost 15 years now, a little bit more than a little bit less than 15 years, but almost 15 years. We've made like I think 14 books together or something. No, like 10 books together. So I have this good relationship with this editor. But like I said, not everything I write becomes a book. I write stuff and I get turned ideas down all the time. Sometimes I'll write something and then maybe a couple years later I'll revisit it, try and find look at it from a different perspective, maybe just focused on a different part of the story. But I feel very lucky that I have this good relationship with this editor and with this publishing company. And now I can't imagine doing something other than books for young readers. I love it.
That's amazing. I loved hearing that because it's always interesting to hear how did that journey get started, and look at I don't know if this is book 10 or 11. I would have to go back and count all of your books, but it's so amazing to see all of your artwork in classrooms and libraries everywhere, and with even more books coming out. So I want to know, this book releases late this fall. What do you have in store for us for 2023? Are you working on new projects, new illustration projects? What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I have a book coming out in 2023. I don't know the exact date yet, but in the spring, I believe. And it's actually a book that'll be published by Abrams, but by their Appleseed imprint, which is for younger readers. And it's a counting book for young kids, but it's about the Day of the Dead. It's kind of like the building an altar, building an ofrenda for the Day of the Dead, and all the different items that go in the ofrenda and the altar. So I'm very happy with how I don't have a physical copy of it yet, but it should. But I'm very happy with how it turned out, and then that will be available sometime next year. And I'm working on on some new ideas for some new picture books.
That's awesome. You already mentioned that kind of little preview, so I wasn't already thinking in my mind. That is one that I'm going to need in my own, in my own library, and I'm sure many others are going to be interested in, something like that. But Duncan, this has been.
Sorry, and it'll be bilingual.
Oh,
So
even
I'm very
better.
happy about that. And some more, question that I often get is, my books are available in Spanish. So there's more and more titles of the ones that I've done already that aren't in Spanish that are going to start coming out in Spanish. So there'll be some of that happening. There's some of that's happened this year, and some more that are coming out next year.
Oh, that's some exciting news because, oftentimes, especially in homes where, often just the parents read Spanish and not English or anything like that, it's good to have books like that. So I'm glad that translation is in the works for those. And hopefully, even more good news about upcoming projects are coming your way as well. But Duncan, this has been exciting. This has been great to know a little bit more about you, your author journey, your illustrating style. And I'm glad we got to chat a little bit more about your books. But before we head out, we're going to play a quick little game called Get to Know the Author, where I ask you just a series of fun questions and you tell me the first answer that comes to mind. Are you ready to play?
Okay.
Let's go. What is your favorite music to listen to?
That's too hard. I'll go with the Giles Peterson show because he plays all the music I like house and hip hop and Brazilian and Latin, and I like lots of different music. So I'll go with my guru, Giles Peterson.
There we go. Do you prefer a quiet or a loud place to write?
Quiet. I need to be very quiet when I write, especially when I first write.
What is your favorite or your go-to snack?
Well, I like chocolate covered almonds, and I like banana chips with chile.
What is a place that you want to travel to?
There's so many places. I would love to go to like Italy, Greece, to Asia, to Cuba, South America, everywhere. There's so many places I would love to visit that I haven't visited.
I could name all of those too. I'm like, those all those sound good to me. What is your favorite Mexican dish?
Probably pozole. I like enchiladas a lot too, but probably pozole.
¿Pozole verde o rojo?
Pozole rojo, just without any meat in it, just the maíz pozolero.
I love that. What is your favorite music to dance to?
Uh, Back in the day when I was in college, I used to dance to a lot of house music. So that's probably my favorite to dance to.
Okay, and last concert you attended?
I'm not sure. I guess I don't go to a lot of concerts, and it's been a while with, the pandemic and having
Right.
kids, older parents and everything. So I can't even remember.
We'll put that one on the back burner. We'll have to think about that one. Last two questions, cats or dogs?
That's hard because my daughter wants a cat and my son wants a dog.
Oh,
Uh, so I'll go a draw.
that one's a 50-50. All right, and last question, what is the last book that you read?
Last book that I've read. Well, I read a lot of books with my kids these days. So we're about to finish one that's all about like Mesoamerican legends. So that's what we're currently. I haven't quite finished it, but we have like only a few stories in it left. So I'll say that it's that one.
Nice. All right, and that was our final question. So before we head out, where can readers purchase copies of your books?
I mean, if you have a local bookstore, definitely check there. And if they don't have it, I'm sure, they can order it for you, get it for you. Abrams has really great distribution, so they're easy to find. You can find them online at all sorts of, Barnes and Nobles and Amazon and different places like that. If you visit my website, which is Duncan or Duncan, Tonatiuh.com, it has a link to other places where you can also buy the books. I need to update my website so it doesn't have the latest books, but that'll give you an idea of some other places, some other websites where you can purchase them also.
Wonderful. And I will link your website as well. And I also want to remind everyone, if you can't purchase a book, request it at your public library so everyone can have access to all of these amazing books. Well, Duncan, fue un placer. Muchísimas gracias for joining me today. I wish you all the best and much success with everything and all of your work. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the opportunity to chat about my work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And have a great week.
Thank you. You too.